right, well, thanks everybody for joining up. This is our official Hyperion MPI training. So today, Andy and I will be covering the APR 16. So this is our home theater preprocessor. It's really just a state-of-the-art cornerstone of high-end home cinema experiences. And then Andy will be talking about the Axis series. So these are our display-driven preprocessors. Those little PoE eARC audio processors got a couple different models, but they can go up to 16 channels of audio. And then we will talk about our Hyperion amplifiers, our Hyperion power amplifiers. So this is really, if you're familiar with the G4 amplifier series, it really kind of just builds on that foundation and adds Dante and AES67 connectivity for doing audio over IP. So really kind of just expands the amplifier's abilities to do lots of different applications, lots of different setups, from home audio distribution or even single room audio handling, audio processing. So lots of really cool stuff. So what we'll do is we'll start with the APR 16. I'll run through key features, key differentiators, just kind of general talking points of the APR 16. And then we'll jump into a user interface demo and actually show off what the user interface looks like. And then we'll talk about some of the future features that are upcoming here pretty soon. I'll hand it off to Andy. He'll do pretty much the exact same thing for the Axis series. And then he'll hand it back to me. We'll finish up with the amplifiers, which the amplifiers don't have a user interface to go through, but we'll talk about their abilities and then kind of how to pair them with both the APR 16 and the Axis series. And then we will look at just some kind of high-level application diagrams. So pairing the APR 16 with the amplifiers, the Axis series with the amplifiers, and so on and so forth, and kind of what whole home audio distribution looks like, or home theater setup looks like with the use pieces of equipment. So first and foremost, we will talk about the APR 16 for signal processing. So 16 channels of processing, premium 32-bit DAC, studio grade HDMI. So this HDMI is full 48 gigabits per second, 7 different inputs, fast switching, EDID and HDCP management on all of those inputs, exceeds RP 2022 standards set forth by CEDIA with the RTA RP 22 technical benchmarks. And we are also Home Acoustics Alliance certified, which means that we are producing sound that is scientifically accurate. So really adhering to all of these really tight restrictions and standards and making sure that this thing is as high performance as it can be. So MSRP is coming in at $7,999. So I think that's been set in stone for quite a while. So nothing new has changed there. All right, we'll kind of step through the rear panel of the unit. So here are the 7 HDMI 2.1 inputs, all at 48 gigabits per second, supporting anything from Blu-ray players to, PlayStations, Xboxes, you name it. In terms of HDMI inputs, we're able to handle that on the unit itself. Here are our 1 stereo analog balanced XLR input, as well as 2 stereo analog unbalanced RCA inputs. So you can see kind of the 2 XLRs there and the set of 4 RCA inputs. Here we got the 2 digital coax inputs and 2 optical inputs. Sorry, inputs and inputs, not outputs. Then we have our 16 analog unbalanced RCA outputs, and these are all fully assignable. So they're not statically, one's a center channel, one's a left channel, and so on and so forth. These are fully assignable, fully matrixable. So you can mix and match how you want your channels to be mapped across all of these different ports. And the same goes for the analog balanced XLR outputs as well. So this is fully matrixable. What is kind of interesting, I probably should call this out, we've been talking through this over the last couple of weeks, is potentially changing the silk screen. It actually does say like front left, front right, center, sub across the back of the unit. Like that's kind of a default setting, but doesn't necessarily match what if you matrix it, if you're changing the things around, then the labels don't really make any sense anymore. So we might just remove those and just have the numbered just the numbered ports like we do with the RCA on top, just to be more consistent. Be curious to hear your feedback. I think everybody would kind of agree that if it's matrixable and all of a sudden your labels don't match with what the back end is, that doesn't make any sense. At that point, you probably start labeling cables as opposed to labeling ports and stuff like that. So, all right, and then we got the HDMI output for eARC return, and one digital optical output. We have an IR input, a trigger input that goes from 3.3 to 12 volts, as well as a trigger output that does +5 or +12 volt triggers. And that is all fully configurable through the UI, which I will show you how that all looks. This also includes a gigabit switch. So the gigabit switch can also be for distributing either Ethernet to a smart TV or something like that, or doing device control, so actually using the Hyperion's API to be able to do all of its control, but also then doing Dante audio distribution, both input and output. So it's just a nice little convenient gigabit switch that does a lot. And we will be changing this up a little bit to be able to you kind of define what port does what, so we can isolate Dante from the control side and stuff like that. So those things will be coming here very, very soon with a software update. But yes, really powerful little gigabit switch in the APR itself to be able to do all of those things. RS-232 for serial control, as well as a USB Type A for offline firmware updates. So this would be, for connecting a PC, laptop, what have you, to be able to just manually upload firmware files to the unit. This is useful for, if you just don't have any internet connectivity, or you don't want it to be networked at all, you just want it to be kind of a standalone kind of analog device. This would be a way of pushing updates to the unit. Then, of course, the most important connector on the entire thing is the AC power input. Switching power, 50, 60 hertz, obviously, you got to plug it in. It's got to work. So, power input. So what's in the box? To quote, I can't remember the movie, 7? Yeah. So the Hyperion APR 16 processor is a 3RU rack mountable unit. We have the Hyperion IR remote control. I do intend to actually include pictures of all of this stuff. We just didn't have it yet, including the remote, so people can kind of take a look at it. So this will be on the 13th when we do it with the reps. We will make sure to add that information. It's the AC power cord, the calibrated microphone for future Dirac live use, the 15-foot USB cable for connected to the USB port, and then, of course, rack ears. It does come with feet as well, so if it's just on a shelf, it does have rubber feet to isolate it from vibrations and things like that. Or rack ears can be mounted on the front of it for actual rack mounting. All right, so the big question is, who are we selling to? So this is, a very, very specific piece of equipment. And so we're really targeting professional AV integrators and custom installers. Just the flexibility of this unit, the fully matrixable outputs, all of the different inputs, spreading up to 48 gigabits per second. It's really advanced processing. It really appeals to those kinds of customers, high-end home theater enthusiasts. So these are people investing in really, really, really high-end reference grade, cinema rooms, 50K plus systems, professional calibrators, so studio grade tools, and then multi-room system designers. So projects requiring scalable and networked audio distribution. So not only doing the, from the home cinema audio processing, we can also do the Dante outputs as well if you're doing multi-room with this unit. So here we'll talk through now the key differentiators. So the studio grade 16-channel architecture. So we talked about the both the RCA and XLR outputs for a total of 32 total physical outputs. Every single output is not only fully matrixable, but we can configure it in terms of 12-band EQ, low and high shelf per channel, independent bass, treble, gain, trim, all per input. Storage of 2-channel and multi-channel sound modes. So depending on if the unit detects whether it's a 2-channel input or a multi-channel input, you can actually tell the unit what to do in each case from an audio processing perspective. So really, really flexible that way. And then multiple subwoofer outputs can run on 4, 6, or even 8 subs if a project calls for it, just by just configuring it correctly. oops. So DAC. So really, the heart of the Hyperion is the Saber DAC. It's one of the most advanced converters available on the market right now with 32-bit processing. The result is exceptional. Measured performance, so dynamic range of 130 dB. Total harmonic distortion is well under thousandths of a percent. And really flat frequency response across the entire spectrum. So staying within a 20th of a decibel from 20 hertz all the way to 20 kilohertz. And then on the output side, we're delivering up to 10 volts RMS over XLR and 4 volts RMS over RCA. So it gives you plenty of headroom for any amplifier or signal chain. And then support up to 24-bit or 192 kilohertz sources for handling, really the highest resolution audio available from really any source. We got the future-proof video performance. I touched on this a little bit, but the 7 HDMI 2.1 inputs all function at 48 gigabits per second, and we do have the HDMI output with eARC return. So that gives us the 8K 60 hertz and 4K 120 hertz support, full HDR support. So all the way from HDR10 and HLG, all the way up to dynamic HDR profiles like Dolby Vision and HDR10 plus. Variable refresh rate. So this is a key feature for gaming. So when you're talking about PS5s, gaming PCs, Xbox Series X, any of those kinds of latest gen gaming platforms, you're going to want variable refresh rate support. A lot of our matrix switchers and things like that we have in the AV Pro Edge side all support this because of that. And so obviously this is going to be an important thing when people are setting up just huge gaming systems with, really awesome, surround sound setups and stuff like that in cinema. Makes for a truly kind of immersive experience. Auto low latency mode, HDCP 2.3, all the way down to 1.4 on all ports. That's all configurable. Then we have what we call the Hyperion Intelligent EDID Synthesis. So it's kind of a mouthful, but really this is our EDID management. So what we're able to do, and I'll show this in the UI tour, is actually combine essentially what is the TV or the source's ability to display video, but then it mixes and matches what the Hyperion's audio functionality is, and so it combines it for an EDID that makes sense for both the video and audio side. Immersive audio format support, so we can do full decode and rendering of Dolby Atmos and DTSX. And then we have 7 audio processing modes, anything from passing it natively to doing some upmixing. There's the all-channel stereo mode. So this is a key thing for distributing stereo signals across all the speakers. So it's great for background music. It can fill a room evenly. Then, of course, the DTS and Dolby processing for, Atmos and DTSX. Stuff that's specific for movies or produced content and stuff like that. All those modes are individually selectable per input. So depending on if, let's say you had a Kaleidoscape or an Xbox or a record player or something like that, you can configure how that audio is actually distributed across all the speakers per input with all these different modes. Another key differentiator. So this is what kind of James alluded to. I need to expand on this a little bit, but industry certifications and standards. So we meet the CEDIA CTA RP22 benchmarks. We are Home Acoustics Alliance certified, ISF certified, and FCC Class B compliant, which that one's not as sexy as the other ones, but still important. All right, so professional control and integration. So there's a 7-inch front panel, LCD screen, touchscreen on the front of the unit for doing anything from just kind of basic controls. There's a screensaver that can go through, if you have family pictures or cool backgrounds and stuff like that. That's all fully configurable on the front panel. There's a full web interface, RS-232, TCP/IP IR control, integrates with all major control systems, including RTI. Full API over Ethernet, trigger inputs and trigger outputs, cloud-based firmware updates, and it's proprietary ARM-based DSP platform. So it's faster and more reliable than PC-based competitors. So some of our competitors just literally use a PC-based DSP in order to do all the sound processing. This is just much more efficient and faster. It doesn't add as much latency, things like that. We have a lot of control over that as well. All right, I'm going to jump to the user interface. Here we go. All right, so when you bring up a browser and point it to the IP address or the Hyperion.local address in your web browser, this is the first screen you would come up with. So here we have some just basic system control, like powering the unit off and on. Volume control, you can either type this in a specific value, you could use the plus and minus buttons to click it, or you can use the slider to adjust volume. And then we can do mute and unmute. Active inputs, so we've got all 7 of the HDMI inputs, as well as our digital, analog, Dante, and eARC sources. So you can pick those, make those the active inputs. And then audio modes for processing. I talked a little bit about those. And so you can manually configure that or change that depending on if something has changed with a particular source. You can do that here. There's also some really cool things in the input settings that we can do that I'll show here in just a little bit. On the system side, and you'll see that if you're not on the main page, it adds the ability to still adjust volume and the active input in the upper left-hand corner, which is pretty handy. System info, video format that we're processing, the audio format, sample rate, and bit depth that we're processing are all kind of in this top bar here. Model number and serial number if needed. For audio settings, we can set a default on volume. So what is the volume of the unit when it turns on? You don't want to blow people away. You can start at a more mild or quiet volume when you turn the system on, as well as limiting it. So if you have a max volume, you don't want to blow yourself away accidentally by turning it up too much. You can actually cap the volume at a certain value that works with your system. The VU meter on the front panel, you can turn this off and on, as well as the display brightness. Again, there's the slider. You can manually enter it or click the plus and minus buttons. For the trigger output, you can turn that off or do the plus 5 volt or plus 12 volts. So whatever it is that you're needing to trigger, you can set that voltage correctly here. So for the screensaver settings, this is where you're uploading all of your images and pictures and stuff like that you want as the screensaver on that front panel. So I don't have anything uploaded to this one right now, but this will give you your gallery of all the pictures that you have, and then you can reorganize them, remove them, do whatever you need to do. Basic screensaver settings. I think if you use a screensaver on a computer or something like that, you kind of understand how this stuff works. Display controls, we can turn off the touch lock. Turn the screen blank after a certain amount of time. So if you want to, if you're worried about burn-in, or you just don't want a bright screen on all the time in the room, you can turn that off and on. Display lock, and then you're able to drag and drop or upload all of your pictures here, and then see all of the things you've got uploaded to the unit. Back up here. System date and time, pretty self-explanatory. Just setting your date and time zone, as well as syncing to NTP, so that'll actually keep track on an NTP time server. You can point it at either something on the internet or something local if you have something. Firmware info. So the way this looks right now, this is going to change. I know this has been some comments with some discussions I had last week, and even with Sam and some of the other guys here in the office. This is pretty busy, to be honest with you. You can actually individually upload FPGA, MC, MCU, and DSP softwares, but that can cause problems where if one doesn't support the other one, or what I mean, it's just kind of convoluted and busy. What we're going to do is kind of distill this into what is just a single update file for end users. So to avoid any of this kind of complications, it'll just show what the current versions are, but only do a one file firmware update, which I think will be a lot safer. We'll also be changing the update channel to not have the ability to do nightly and beta releases. We're only going to do production ready. We don't want to brick units in the field. To be perfectly frank, this is great for development time. When you have an engineer that's pushing software to it and making changes constantly as they work through the day and stuff like that. It's awesome for that. But then that should be a development tool only, and something that has to be manually set by an engineer or something like that. And so really what we'll do is just default to production ready. It's been fully tested. We've pushed it to our cloud firmware platform, and we trust it, and it'll be good just to avoid any kind of support problems and stuff like that. So let's see here. You can save and load settings. So if you're let's say you're an installer or something like that, and you have an entire configuration that you'd like to start with, you can at least upload that, and the unit is mostly configured for whatever system you're actually doing, as opposed to having to do everything from scratch. Or if you have two APRs in the same house, you want to set them up the exact same way, you only need to do one, and then you can load the settings on the other one, as well as a support snapshot. So this is useful for us when we're doing troubleshooting. This literally takes the state of the unit, and then we can upload it to one of our units here in the lab, and then potentially like reproduce issues much more quickly. Lots of really good things available here from our perspective in terms of development and fixing any potential bugs and stuff like that. Here we can reboot individual pieces of the unit. This will most likely get distilled as well into just a system reboot, and then being able to do a factory reset if you need to. We can also do hot plug detect toggle controls per HDMI port. And then on the engineering settings side, we can turn CEC on and off. We can do DTS dialog correction control or dialog control. So we can add or increase the volume. DRC control and dialog normalization are hidden away in the engineering settings. And then if we get into the input settings, so here we can actually select, it doesn't select the active input. It allows you to start configuring the inputs, how it reacts to audio, what you're doing with EDID, what are you doing with HDCP, changing volumes and stuff like that. So for instance, with this HDMI 1, we can either click Edit Settings here or click on the actual physical port itself. This brings up your HDMI configuration panel. So you can see your hot plug detect, your EDID configuration here. So what's pretty cool about this is that you see all of your connected display information here. So it even gives like the model number of the TV, its size, its capabilities, HDR capabilities, audio formats that it supports, color, resolutions, and it actually goes, full on all of the resolutions that it supports. And then you can get into where you want to then modify the EDID. So if you want to change maybe the max resolution, like force it to 8K or force it to 4K, what have you, refresh rates for gaming consoles or something like that, color depth, HDR, we can actually turn off certain types of HDR if we need to, variable refresh rate, audio low latency modes. So you just really have this, are we going to automatically detect and pass through what we need to do for video, or do we need to do any kind of EDID tweaking like we would with any of our AV Pro Edge products? And then we can do the same thing, not the same thing, but we can start tweaking bass, treble, gain, and trim settings. And this is all per input as well. So have full control over that. With the advanced settings, this is where we can do the 2-channel and multi-channel mode. So if the APR detects a 2-channel, what do we do with it? Do we use the last mode? Do we do it, keep it at 2-channel stereo? Do we upmix it so that we, fill that room full of, background music or something like that? Do we do, Dolby upmixing? Is it a multi-channel audio coming in? What do we do with it? Do we do a 2-channel downmix? Do we upmix? Do we do our Dolby processing? Really, so it depends on if you want to do a downmix, if you want to do an upmix, depends on what's really connected to that particular input, allows you to tweak that as needed. And then we can do the lip sync delay from all the way up to 1,000 milliseconds worth of lip sync adjustment here per input. Then engineering controls, this is really just all about HDCP. So we can detect what's going on for certain HDCP modes, things like that. You can do that per HDMI input. Here you can also do a quick make active. You can give it a custom name as well. So if you wanted to give it some contextual naming, like I'd say it's like my Xbox, give it the Xbox name. You can even hide the input. So if it's unused input, maybe you only have like 4 devices connected to it. You could hide, the remaining 3 inputs just to kind of clean up your user interface and options that are available to the end user. And then when I close that, you can see it actually gave that label on the HDMI input. And then on the analog inputs, this is going to be pretty similar in terms of audio settings. So again, bass, treble, gain, trim, input sensitivity, and then those different modes for if it's a 2-channel or multi-channel type input, you'll be able to pick what kind of processing we're doing to it. All right, then output assignment. This gets into setting your speaker arrangements. So anything from a 2-channel arrangement all the way up to 9.1.6. We can also then change all of the speaker levels. We can turn on pink noise as well as the leveling. So as you're doing your tweaking of the room and stuff like that manually, you can do all of that from here, and adjust all of those individually. You can actually switch it between a grid mode, which gives you a lot more settings on screen all at once, or you can do more of a back panel if you're more of a visual reference person. But here you can click into these, pick what speaker type it's going to be, frequency response, crossover frequency, so low and high pass filters, gain, and also adjusting distances. You can switch between meters and feet as well for adjusting distances. This is also where you would turn on DIRAC. This won't be available right away. We will actually be disabling DIRAC. It will be a future software update. So once we get, and I should say this, it's not that it doesn't work. We're just waiting for the DIRAC certification. We've already tested this. It works very well. I believe the guys down in Florida did, I think, one of Jeff's rooms or something like that with an APR 16, and it was like fully functional. The whole, using the mic for the DIRAC art adjustments and stuff like that worked really, really well. So we're just really waiting for them to give us the green light, and then we can turn it on in software, and then people can go and make those purchases for DIRAC licenses after the fact. EQ. So this is, so 12 EQ per channel. So here we can actually turn some of these on just so you can kind of see how the web interface works. It's pretty cool. So here it's fully interactable, and so you can really tweak these as you want. In terms of adjusting EQ for all the individual channels and things like that. Flatten EQ, you can copy EQs from other channels as well. So maybe your front left and front right actually share the same EQ settings. You can actually copy them so you don't have to do it from scratch every single time. So that kind of, speeds up everything. And then you can flatten the EQ if you need to. Network side, go ahead.
Cool. All right. So Axis, these are display-driven audio processing products, right? So they differ, and they are a little bit similar to the APR 16. So we'll go over all that. But I think that's the key differentiator here. Obviously, they're much smaller, they're compact, they're PoE, but they're really designed for applications outside of the home theater. APR 16 is your super high-end, expensive home theaters. Axis is designed for all the other rooms in a home. So whether that's a bedroom, whether that's living room, outdoor patio, right? These are designed to be connected to displays and extract the audio from the displays themselves and then convert them into Dante, right? So there's 3 models. There's the Axis 2, Axis 10, Axis 16. And they all basically do similar stuff. Well, the Axis 10 and the Axis 16 are kind of in their own category versus the Axis 2. So the Axis 2 is just a rebrand of ETV. So everybody that's familiar with ETV and has sold ETVs and understand how that worked, nothing has changed with the Axis 2 compared to the ETV. So it's still a 2-channel device. It has eARC, it has digital inputs, and it converts those signals to a 2-channel Dante or AES 67 stream. Through eARC, you do get the 96K audio. So if you're using it for music streaming or any scenarios where you want that higher sample rate audio, it will support that. The other auto sensing inputs as well. So the eARC and the digital inputs will auto switch based on whether they detect audio or not. So that it can be great for switching from a display to maybe another audio-based input, and then that will happen automatically. And the Axis 2 is really designed for applications that aren't your main living area. So any stereo zones or audio that you want to peel off that is stereo-based. So maybe you have bedrooms, you have your outdoor patio displays, you have your workout rooms, right? You want to take all this audio from all your TVs throughout your home. But you don't need a multi-channel device, and you don't care that it needs to be multi-channel, right? You're okay with 2-channel because they're simple, kind of these ancillary extra areas. But you want it all tied into one large digital Dante network that comes with Axis and Hyperion. So a great example of that is pairing it with a director, right? You can pair it with a 4800 or a 6800D, depending on how many output zones you need. And that's a pair that is perfect for doing 2-channel distribution in all your different zones and pulling that back into a director and distribute that and matrix that to all the different zones in the home. Axis 10. So this is where we get into multi-channel audio. So Axis 10 is a 8+2. So it does 8 channels of bitstream multi-channel audio, and it has an additional 2-channel dedicated stereo downmix. So that's where we get the 10 total channels. And one way to think about this is Axis 10 is basically look at it as a bijou, but without the built-in amplification, right? So kind of like APR 16, where it's a preprocessor, and you pair it with the hype amps. Axis works in the same way, right? So Axis 10 and Axis 16 are preprocessors that are designed to be used with separate Dante-enabled amplifiers. The Tetra, Penta, Hepta, the Director series, right? And the beauty of digital audio, right, is that you can start with something today and you can expand on it in the future, right? You're not limited to physical I/O. Obviously, there's a digital audio limitation, right? But it's much more flexible than a physical analog connection. So somebody could start with a 3.1 system or a 5.1 system today, and then add on 2 extra height channels to do a 5.1.2, or they can add 2 extra surrounds to do 7.1, right? So you can start with something that's in a main living area that maybe doesn't need to be a full-blown Dolby Atmos setup, and they can start with something simple and expand on that as they need and as they add more speakers and such. So a quick overview. So like I said, display-driven audio, that's the focus for these. eARC-driven. So it's your smart TVs, you're doing streaming Netflix, Hulu, whatever from your TV, or you can pull off the eARC if you have local inputs into that TV as well, right? So you had an Apple TV, you had an Xbox that were going into the TV. The TV is acting as your HDMI switch, and then this pulls off the audio to send it over the Dante network. And this, like I said, this is a preprocessor, so the APR 16 isn't needed, right? I mean, the APR 16 is not a requirement to use Axis. So you can have your APR 16 in your home theater room, and then you can have an Axis 10 or an Axis 16 in your main living area, and they're not necessarily directly tied to each other, right? So this can be act as a standalone audio processor. So again, 8 channels, bitstream, Dolby DTS, through eARC. We can do up to a 7.1 or 5.1.2 system with this. And there is a dedicated stereo downmix. So that is +2. So that is always there, and it is always active. So you can send that downmixed 8 channels of bitstream audio to your stereo zone. So you had a main living area, and you had an adjacent kitchen, or you had a patio that was open or something, and you wanted to take that audio that was in the living room and send it to your other zones. That's what that dedicated 2-channel downmix is designed to do. So you compare it obviously with the hype amps, so the Tetra, Penta, Hepta, to get the high end, high power outputs for the multi-channel audio, and then you compare it with the Director series for your stereo distribution throughout the rest of the home. And then just like the Axis 2, the digital input and the eARC are auto sensing as well. One thing to call out is that there is dedicated Dante and control Ethernet connections here. So you can very easily, like Aaron was saying, where you can, and if in the future, isolate and control that switch on the APR 16, similar to what we can do here. So the Dante output of the Axis 10 can be sent to a dedicated Dante network that's on an MXNet switch, for example. Maybe you even have an MXNet 10G system that has Dante, the TCVR Pro, right? There's a lot of flexibility in how you can design this. All part of that, Dante network. And then you have your Ethernet connection, which is for web UI control, for API control, for switching and things like that. So that's the Axis 10. Alrighty. And then we have the Axis 16. And really, there's a few different things. I'm not going to go over everything again because it's very similar to the Axis 10. But it's Axis 10 plus, the additional 6 channels of Dante, right? So this allows you to do up to a 916 multi-channel speaker configuration without downmix, or a 914 speaker configuration with downmix. So the difference with the Axis 10 is that the extra 2 channels are always active. With the Axis 16, the channels 15 and 16 can be an optional downmix, right? So if you don't need a stereo downmix and you want the full 916, great, then you can just have it set up like that. But if you do still need that stereo downmix, then you can turn channels 15 and 16 into that, which would then reduce the multi-channel config to a 914 output. So, and this one is a little bit behind the Axis 10 release. So we know Axis 2 is selling, it's released, it's on the price list. Axis 10 will be part of MPI next week, or the 13th, whenever that is. Axis 16 is still pending the Dolby certification. So that's, I think we're going to still have it part of the MPI, but the availability of that is still a little bit behind the Axis 10. So. Yeah, then WebUI stuff. So let me get into this real quick. Let me just pull this up real quick, right? So if you guys are familiar with the Bijou interface, it looks very similar. So you have your input selection, ER, digital, your audio mode, and how you want the audio input to be handled. Stereo downmix volume, speaker volume, right? All pretty straightforward stuff. And then we have all these other settings that are pretty much identical to Bijou, right? Speaker volume, max volume, downmix volume, your firmware updates. I think maybe the one to talk about is just the speaker config, right? So again, you can choose how you want the Axis 10 and Axis 16 to be configured based on your actual physical speaker layout. So obviously the Axis 10 will have more drop-down menus here than the Axis 16 will have more drop-down menus here. But yeah, you can choose the front and left are always enabled on the Axis 10, and then the stereo downmix is always enabled. But then you can choose how you want any of the other channels to operate. So if you don't need a center, you don't need a sub, maybe you're just doing a 2-channel setup with this, which is unlikely, but you can turn those on and off. With the top surround option, you have the ability to choose how you want channel 7 and 8 to operate, depending on your speaker. So if you have a 7.1 or a 5.1.2, you can choose whether you want your surround backs or your height fronts, right? And that will change the audio that's sent on those Dante channels. You have your frequency responses, so high pass filters on your channels here. You have your test tones with the ability to adjust gain and distance levels for all your individual speaker outputs. So again, a lot of the similarities with the Hyperion APR 16. So, and again, here's your EQ stuff, being able to adjust your PEQs and high pass filters and stuff, and bass and stuff like that. So, the other thing I just wanted to call out real quick is we are doing an update to Dante controller. I mentioned this briefly, and then we also had it at ISE, but here's just Axis 10 in Dante controller with this new update that we have. So you can see all 8 channels are tied to input 1, so we can route all these channels to an 8 output zone. So you can route it to the hype amps, you can route it to a director, right? So that's an update that this is not yet released. I'm going to try to get this out at the same time as the MPI for all this Hyperion stuff, because it goes hand in hand, right? Being able to do 16 channels with the APR 16 and Axis, right? So just an FYI that this is an update that's coming. So we can route multiple channels per in and output. And then you can see here, I've separated the downmix channels to a separate input. So you can route your 8 channels of bitstream audio to where it needs to go, and then you can separate your downmix left and right to another input and route that separately. So, but yeah, that's Axis. So if you guys have questions, let me know. But otherwise, I'll give it back to Aaron to talk about the amps.
All right, jump into the amplifiers now to finish her up. So these are the Hyperion series power amps. So we got 3 different models: a 7-channel, 5-channel, a 4-channel. Those MSRP pricings are initial. I'm still having conversations with Chris and James. I need to talk with Matt and some other folks just to kind of get the gist of how we want to position this against the G4 platform and stuff like that. So just to kind of give you a very like rough idea of where we're thinking about pricing these things, I wanted to make sure I mentioned it on today's training. But who are we selling to? Really the same people that we're selling, obviously the APR 16, because it, from an analog, cinema perspective, whether it's RCA or XLR, connections between the processor and the amplifier, this is going to be hand in hand with all the really high end home cinema type applications. But the Dante and the networked AV adapter folks that are then using the Axis series, now you have all those Dante inputs, and so now you can do all of your amplification from the Axis units that are display driven processors. You're able to use that same hardware for that as well. So key differentiators, obviously, the native Dante and AES67 connectivity is going to be a huge differentiator here compared to especially the older the G4 series that was just all analog amplifier. This enables that Dante and AES67 inputs from the Axis series, so that way you're able to do your audio distribution over Dante and then do all your amplification for your big speakers and stuff like that, like locally. Class H efficiency. So they actually run extremely cool, especially for as much power as they can produce. And so it doesn't require, excessive ventilation in the rack or anything like that. And they can are really just more efficient and, less heat than a typical class AB design would have. Scalable multi-channel configuration. So with the 4, 5, and 7-channel model, we can mix and match, the 7 and the 4 and all of those different kinds of combinations for your 916 configurations or a 7.1 configuration. And then just aesthetically, they all have that same front panel design as the APR 16. So when they're all racked up in your nice, cable managed rack, it's really a nice thing to show off, and it all looks consistent that way. They do have the light drive anti-clipping protection. So, you've invested a lot of money in not only the processor and your amplifiers, but also your speakers. And so the amplifiers have our own proprietary circuitry that detects clipping. So you're not, blowing your speakers away. So, just really protecting the entire investment by investing with Hyperion amplifiers. Professional grade connectivity. So we got our heavy duty 5-way binding posts. To pretty much accept any kind of termination that you want. Balanced XLR inputs reject noise on long cable runs, unbalanced inputs with pass-through, enable daisy chaining of additional amplifiers if needed. 12-volt trigger, so you can come from the APR 16 and be able to automatically power on and off your amplifiers. Just really high quality. Those are actually more, we just want to point this out, they're more of like a completely clear connector. It's just the way that render is. It's like the background, the black background is making it look like those are kind of a tinted thing. They're actually just perfectly clear connectors for the binding posts. All right, and then to jump into some connection diagrams. So here we have our APR 16 connected with a 4-channel and a 7-channel amp. And then our RS 1000 subwoofer amp for our dedicated subwoofer connectivity there. We got 3 HDMI sources, and we're building out our top of the line home theater setup. And then here we use the APR 16 to do a little bit of home audio distribution. So we still have our, home cinema or our high-end living room cinema experience, but then we're also doing some Dante output to an MXNet switch and then to a network amp to do some just 2-channel audio in the kitchen. So if you've got the game on or something like that, you need to go get another beer, some snacks or something like that, you can walk into the kitchen. You don't lose, what's going on over the audio. So you'd be able to carry that between, kind of your main entertainment space into the kitchen and then back again. So that's really kind of the concept of a basic kind of 2-channel down mix out of the APR 16.
These are all really basic diagrams, right? I mean, this is, the Axis 2 taking, a 2-channel input from a display sending it to the Dante network, and then going to a director, right? So these are for your ancillary areas, your bedrooms, your outdoor areas, your workout rooms, right? Very, very basic, just eARC to 2-channel Dante. And then the Axis 10 and the Axis 16 diagrams are basically the same, with just changing the number of channels and the hype amps that are used, right? So again, you have your living room, you have your eARC display taking, your 8 channels of audio over the Dante network. And then you have that going to a Hepta amplifier for your 7 channels, going to an RS100 with the addition of the Dante D PoE to get that Dante stream into the RS100, because we don't have a Dante subwoofer amp. And then you can see that there's that multi-zone director in there, and that can be used to send that down mix channel from the Axis 10 into your other areas, right? So that could be a kitchen. It could literally be any other stereo zone that you have throughout the home. You can multiply that by 8, right? And then the Axis 16 diagram is basically the same thing, right? Just with more channels. So we have a Hepta 7 and a Tetra 4-channel amplifiers in there to get the extra channels from the Axis 16, but basically everything else is identical.
All right. And that's it. I think that's it for today. Thank you very much.